Hello and welcome back. Today we'll be expanding upon the previous video on how to create an inventory system by creating the foundations of a crafting system. We'll mostly just be handling some simple stuff like setting out the actual crafting UI and kind of getting it ready to be hooked up in the future. But first, let's just get to the really simple thing, creating a little area that we can interact with to open the crafting menu. So in this case, that will be a crafting bench. So to do that, what we're going to do is... And very quickly, this is very literally straight from the last video from the inventory system, so it is the exact same project. If you haven't seen that video, I suggest you go watch it. A link will probably either be in the description or at the end of the video. Yes, let's just create a new scene. This will be of other node, and we're just going to make this an area 2D, because this is an area that we need to interact with, and area 2Ds are a good way of doing that. So I'm going to use Control A and I'm going to add to the Area 2D a collision shape. And then I'm going to click on Area 2D and add a sprite to it as well. Need to see what we're actually crafting with, right? Now, the sprite that I'm going to be using, if I go to my assets here and I go into the art, Kenny Tiny Dungeon, once again, link to the asset pack will be in the description. If I scroll all the way down to, I think it's 74, it's just a little anvil. And I think that's perfect for a crafting bench. So with that done, let's go and click our collision shape and give it a collision shape. There we go. I'm going to hit Control. Actually, no, we're going to rename Area 2D to just crafting. I can't spell the word crafting bench. There we go. Now I'm going to hit Control S and save. I'm going to save this under scenes. Let's go under entity. Create a new folder and we will call it benches for all the different types of benches we want. And I'm going to hit save there. Now what we're going to do is we are going to add a very quick and simple script to the crafting bench. So let's go and do that. Let's go and add script, hit create. I'm going to give this a class underscore name of crafting bench. And now we are going to remove all of the code in the actual crafting bench, so the ready function and the physics process function, or the process function, because we don't need them. And we are going to click on our crafting bench root node, so the area itself, go to node, and we're going to connect the signals up here for body entered and body exited. So let's do those real quick and I'll explain them as we go through them. What it's going to allow us to do is when our character, because our character is a character body 2D, enters this area, it's going to fire the signal or run the function here for on body entered. So that's going to happen with any body entering. So any node 2D entering that zone, it will go, oh, a body has entered this, which means we're going to need to do a couple of checks to make sure that it is the player and not, say, an enemy. It'd be really awkward if an enemy walks over the crafting bench and we can now use the crafting bench from a mile away, right? We want to be able to use it only when we're next to it. So to do this, on body entered, we're going to write if body is player entity. I'm going to write pass for now. Actually, we'll do this. We'll do a print statement to make sure that it works, and we'll just say player entered. And we'll do the same thing on the body exited. So if body is player entity, we will print out the player exited. There we go. So, player entity. Once again, from the previous video, we set up a player entity. So if I go and control click on the player entity class here, it'll take me to the script. This is very literally just the very simple script that is set up for moving the player around. That's it. It handles flipping, basic movement, and some animation stuff. I've just given it a class name for player entity so I can do if comparisons quite easily. So in this case, I can go if player, or if the body is player entity. So hit Control S and save. Get rid of some of that white space. Go back to our world. Now I'm going to just add the crafting bench to the entity container here. So I'm going to hit Control Shift A to add. I'm going to add the crafting bench, grab my move tool and move it down. Let's move it down to here. So it's just next to the house. What I should be able to do now is press play, walk over to the anvil, and in the inspector down in the bottom here, I should be able to player entered, player exited, player entered, player exited. So we're now getting a good read on whether the player is entering or exiting the area where we can actually interact with things, so the interactable area. We're just going to do a very simple thing here, and we're going to just create a boolean. We're going to go, we'll go var is underscore interactable of type bool and set that equal to false. So it's immediately set to false unless the player is inside of it. So let's go and go on body entered. If the player is the player entity, we want to go is underscore interactable is equal to true. And if the player has exited, is underscore interactable is equal to false. So that's just a very basic interaction system. Now, one thing I will say about this is usually what I would end up doing is parting out or componentizing the interaction area. So we can just kind of put that on a bunch of different things. So you could basically go, oh, is this thing interactable with the E key, E being your interaction key, right? And then you could basically use a signal after that to decide what type of interaction it needs to be. So in this case, we don't really need to do that because it's just going to be a really simple crafting system. So that is the crafting bench sorted. The next thing that we want to kind of move into is going to be our actual crafting UI. But for that, we are going to be needing some recipes, right? We're going to be needing some recipes for the items that we wish to craft or want to craft. Now, let's just go and create those. We have already created some resources. We did that in the previous video of items here. So if I go to itemdata.gd, this is our item data resource, which means I can create items, as many as I want, from this item data. It will contain a ID, a name, the texture, and its maximum stack size. So let's go and click on the health potion.tres here, go to the inspector, and you'll see here, ID, name is health potion, texture is the red potion, and stack size is 5. So with that in mind, let's go and create a new folder in the resources folder, because we're just basically going to do the same thing, but for recipes instead. So inside the resources folder here, I'm going to create a new folder, and we're going to call this recipes. Inside the recipes folder, I'm going to create a new script. I'm going to call the new script item recipes. I need to make sure that naming convention is correct. It is, yep, so capital I, capital D. Capital I, capital R. Let's go and double click on that and open it. First is turning it into a resource. So instead of extends node, we want to extend resource. Now to make sure the engine picks it up correctly, we're going to give it a class underscore name of item recipe. And now we can remove the ready and process functions and just start listing the variables that we want each recipe to have. So I'm going to write at export var so we can get it available in the inspector to edit. This is going to just be the recipe underscore name of type string. I'm going to set it equal to an empty string. We'll do another one for the final item, so export var recipe underscore final underscore item. Now, once again, coming from previous video, we created the item data.gd here, and this is kind of why I was pointing it out, is the final item is going to be this item data.gd, so it's going to be of the class item data. We're going to set it equal to null. That way we can just throw in a health potion, mana potion, or stamina potion as the final item. Finally, we're going to want a way of figuring out what this thing costs to craft, right? What materials it needs. So let's create another export var. I'm going to do a recipe underscore material underscore array of type array, and that is going to be a typed array of item data. And we'll set that equal to an empty array. Now, here is a complex problem that I kind of ran into. In the inventory video, I decided that the inventory was going to be housed within a dictionary. I prefer dictionaries usually because they're just easier for me to work with or read. This is one of those instances where they're not as easy to work with because you can't export a typed dictionary or type hinted dictionary in Godot. If you could do that, that would be great. That way I could just be like, you know, your first item, your key would be an item or of item data, and your value would just be an integer to say, hey, this is how many items you need. That would be really great. We can't do that. So what we need to do is basically stitch a dictionary together based off of the array so we can be or continue to work with dictionaries. This is the downside of a dictionary-based inventory. You could do an array-based inventory where you just have an inventory, which is basically just an array that just stores every single item. In hindsight, that is more than likely what I should have done, but I'm stubborn and we will stick with this. So this is the item recipe done now that I've got my little rant over. Next thing we need to do is let's actually just make some recipes, right? Let's go right click on the recipe folder, create new resource. In the search bar, I'm going to write item recipe. There we go. And the first recipe I'm going to make will be, we'll go health underscore potion underscore recipe. And I'm basically just going to make a health potion, stamina potion, and mana potion recipe. So I'm not going to make the same mistake I did last time. I'm going to name this health potion. Hit enter. Give it the final item here will be the health potion. And the material array here. Now, the crafting materials that I'm going to be using probably won't make sense, but this is more about just, hey, this is how I've kind of figured out how to do this. So what will a health potion take? A health potion will take 1 stamina potion, and we'll go 1 mana potion. So that's what this will take. 1 stamina potion, 1 mana potion, and you will be able to make a health potion. Cool. Do you know, just to mess with it a little bit more, let's add a second mana potion. So 1 stamina and 2 mana potions. That's 3 ingredients needed for 1 health potion recipe. Now let's go and do the same thing. I really dislike how I've named this. So we are going to rename this with basically removing the underscores and capitalizing each letter because that sits right with my head. There we go. So we have the health potion recipe. Let's go create a new resource of item recipe. Call this one the mana potion recipe. Hit save. Let's go set it back up with mana potion as its name. The final item will be a mana potion, and we will give this, let's go, 5 ingredients. We'll go 3 health potions. Gonna just put these in different locations as well to make sure that this works how I want it to, and we'll go 2 stamina potions. You know, just to get 1 mana potion. That doesn't make much sense, but hey, it'll do. And we will do 1 more resource of type item recipe, and this will be the stamina potion recipe. Hit save. Let's go and make sure we name it. Now let's go and give it the final item of stamina potion, and we're just going to make this cost 1 mana potion. Why not? There we go, 1 mana potion. No, not 1 stamina potion, 1 mana potion. There we go. So we now have 3 recipes for our 3 items. That's going to be really useful. But that is our resources created. So let's move on to the thing that's actually going to take a while in this video, and that is the actual UI and the script for the crafting UI. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to 2D view, to close the output. I'm going to shrink this window a little bit. We're going to click add new scene of other node, and this is going to be of type panel container. Why panel container? Don't really know. I just have been preferring to use panel containers recently. I'm going to make sure that this is set to full screen or full rect with the little anchoring up here, anchor preset full rect. Going to rename this to the crafting UI. Hit Control S and save, and I'm going to save this under my UI folder. Now, what do I want added into this? Well, I'm going to want a margin container because I always like having me a margin container. Make sure that it is set to full rect, which it already is. I'm going to give it a override constant of 12, 12, 12, and not 21, 12. Gives a nice 12 pixel margin on each side of our rectangle here. Now to that margin container, I'm going to first add a hbox. You're going to have to just kind of follow along with this. I have a bunch of settings on the side as usual with UI because UI can be a bit finicky. Now, however you create your UI is completely up to you. You don't actually have to follow this. You can just kind of be whimsical, make the thing you want to make. But this is what I'm going to do. So, hbox container. The alignment I'm going to set to center. And that's pretty much it. That's all I need to do with the hbox container. I'm going to hit Control S and save. Now, I'm going to add a node that I don't see get used often in any Godot video, and that is the tree node. A control used to show a set of internal tree items in a hierarchical structure. This is actually really useful. Now, I'm not going to be diving too deep into how to use tree nodes, but I will be using it a little bit just to create really easy functionable lists. So let's go and add one of those as well. Now, the tree does need a custom minimum size for it to actually kind of look normal. So the custom minimum here, I'm going to do this in the x-axis, so going from left to right x-axis. So the horizontal plane, the horizontal plane. I'm going to make this 364 pixels wide. Now that is all we need done for the tree here. So going back to our HBox container, we're going to click on that and we're going to Control A and we're going to add a VBox container to that now. So we get this up and down container, which is really nice, or vertical container, or vertical box container, which is what it's actually called. We're going to set the alignment to center again. And we are going to give this a theme override constant separation of 46 pixels because that will sit right with what we're doing. Now, inside this VBox container, first thing that I'm going to want to add is, if I hit Control A is a label. So we're going to want the title of our actual item here. So I'm going to write test item name label. Now I'm going to grab the horizontal alignment on that label. I'm going to set it to center. I'm going to set the vertical alignment to center. Make sure that this is centered. And as you can see, it's still pushed to the left. I don't really like that. So what we're going to do here is we are going to grab the horizontal alignment. We're going to click that button and we're going to basically align this as much as we can and expand this as much as we can. So there we go. If we go to the VBox container and we grab the container sizing here, we go down to expand and we click the expand button. There we go. We are now expanded across the whole screen. We've got our tree on the left side and our title in the middle here. We don't want this actually in the middle though, do we? We're going to want this at the top. Now, how do we do that? Well, let's rename this label to title label. And now in this VBox container, we want to go and use Control A and we're going to just add an item texture. And for that, we need a texture rect. There we go. Now, the texture rect does need very specific minimums and maximums just to get a nice square picture. So let's go and first give this a texture, right? Let's just give it a random texture. It doesn't really matter which one we pick. I'm going to pick one of an item that we're actually going to be using as a texture. In this case, we'll just use the health potion. And as you can see, it's a little bit squished. We don't want it being squished, so let's go to layout, go to the custom minimums. I'm going to use 132 by 132, and that kind of unsquishes it a little bit, but we need to kind of make sure we need to change the container sizing inside of the layout here to shrink center, and expand. Now, as you can see, that's pushed our title label up to the very top here. Let's come back to that real quick. Add a font size to this. We'll go 32 pixels because that's nice and big. So what we have here so far is on our tree here on the left side, we're going to have a list of items. So a list of recipes that we can click. On the right side, it's going to populate with the name of the recipe that we're using, a picture of the item that we are crafting, and then we're going to need some way of showing off the ingredients that's going to need, right? So let's go and do that real quick. Let's click on our VBox container here. Let's use Control A and we're going to add a scroll container. Scroll containers are basically just a container node that gives a vertical or horizontal or both scroll bars on the top or on the right side or left side and the bottom of the box that you're using. That way you can have things that, a literal scroll box. It's just really useful. Now with the scroll container here, we're going to go down to layout. We're going to go down to container sizing and we're just going to hit expand. So that actually expands and fills our container out properly. Now, as you can see, this is giving us a little yellow warning saying that it needs something inside of it. Well, it says here that it needs either a VBox or HBox, and then it says etc. One thing we can add to this to really make this look kind of neat is a grid container. Grid containers are literally just a container filled with slots in it, right? It's filled with columns and you can just put things in those columns like a normal inventory system would work in most video games. So let's go and change the column amount. We're going to add 5 columns to this. And we're going to set the layout here on the container size into expand. And we now have this grid container. Let's go and add some items to it and make sure that this actually works well, right? I'm actually just going to grab the health potion image here, and I'm just going to drag that into the Oh, it doesn't want to do that. Fair. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use Control-Shift-A, and I'm going to add the inventory slot to this, because this is a little thing that we built in the previous video, and then I can just kind of duplicate this, and we can see how this is going to function. Now, if I very quickly hit Run Current Scene, and we have a look at this, you see it's a bit weird, right? It's off-center, it's a little bit odd. We don't want that, we want this actually centered. So to center it, we're just going to not shrink to center, we want fill. So what we want to do here is we want to come up to our size settings here where it says align with expand. We want to basically just, center this up with both horizontal alignments, and then we should be able to just expand like that, and that will center out our menu. Now we could add as many columns as we want to this. Let's go 7. Why 7? I don't know. 7 is feeling like a good number. That's got a little bit against script, but hey, this is looking a little better. So finally, if we click on that VBox container one more time, we're going to want to go Control-A and add. We're going to want to add a button, right? We want a button that goes, hey, craft this thing. So we're going to write craft inside the text box on that button. We're going to come down to layout. We're going to go custom minimum size. I'm going to go 264 in the X and just 64 in the Y. Makes a nice kind of chunky button for us to use. Now if I press run current scene one more time, this is how our crafting menu looks. Now there are some odd things that we kind of might want to mess around with here, like the size of the texture. For instance, the texture size is looking a little bit big, right? But that might just be because of, I don't know, custom separation in the VBox. Let's kind of tone that down a little bit. Let's go 24 pixels and see how that looks. Let's go 12, half that. Let's go 0 and see how that looks. 0 nearly looks okay, but there we go. Yeah, we'll leave it at 12. That way it's not clipping into the button or anything like that, and it actually looks kind of decent. So that is the UI kind of sped through. I do apologize if that was a bit fast. UI is drives me a bit crazy. But yeah, please rewatch the video and just go slowly through it if you need to make sure you're kind of doing it correctly. If you have issues with how the UI is kind of ends up turning out, usually it's because of like anchoring and things like that. So just go through your anchoring, make sure that's all set correctly, and yeah, if you want to create this exact same thing, just follow it through, and yeah, you will be able to do that. So next thing that we want to do here is on the crafting UI, we want to add a script. Now I'm immediately going to go and give this a class underscore name. This will be called the crafting underscore UI. I'm going to hit Control S and save. Now the process function we don't need, and the ready function we actually will need. So what are we going to be needing inside of our crafting UI? Let's go take a look at it. We're going to be needing reference to the tree box here so we can populate it, the label so we can change it, the texture so we can set the texture correctly, the grid container here so we can actually populate it with our items, or specifically our inventory slots, because we're going to be reusing those, and our button. That's pretty much all we're going to really be needing. Now, on the button, we can actually skip for this episode or this video, and we can kind of figure that one out on the next one. But let's get references to those things first. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go, okay, tree. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to not make the scene root. That was a dumb thing for me to do. If you do that, you can just click on the box and then hit Control Z, and it will undo that current issue. So we want to right click on this, and we want to access as unique name. Now we're going to hold down left click, click and drag, Control Shift drop, and it will create an onReady var for us for the tree. So that is the tree. Let's grab the title label. Let's do the same thing, unique name. Let's then grab the grid container, do the same thing, Control, Shift, drop. Now we have access to the 3 things that we actually need to be messing around with. Oh, wait, no, I forgot the texture rect for the item texture. Let's go and rename this to the item texture. Then access as unique name and pull it through, and there we go. So we now have unique names for all of the onReadies we need. Just above this, I'm going to add one more onReady. This is going to be a var, and this is going to be for the inventory underscore slot, right? Because we're going to want to pretty much instantiate as many slots as we need depending on how many materials we actually need to use for the recipe. So this is going to be of type packed scene, so we can instantiate it on the go when we need to. After that, we are going to need, that's going to need to be an export array, not an onReady. After that, we're going to we're going to want to actually store a list of every single recipe that we have created. Now there's a few easy ways of doing this. One of the easy ways is to actually do some file reading and read the file location that you've stored all your recipes in and store them inside of an array. That works. It does break when you end up building the game, because of how Godot builds. It ends up breaking some of those locations and things like that, so it won't actually find them on the finalized built version of the game. So I'm not going to do that. There is some add-ons that you can use, if memory serves, to fix that. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do this the kind of manual way. I'm going to go export var recipe underscore array of type array, and it's going to be a typed array for item recipes. I'm going to set that equal to an empty array. That's pretty much it. That is all we really need. We're going to need to create a dictionary, right? So this is something that I was kind of talking about. Sorry to jump around a lot, but this is something I was talking about a little bit ago. Working with dictionaries is a pain. I preferred it. It wasn't the best thing to do, but we're going to stick with it. And then eventually I will look back at this laugh and remake it probably better. So what we're going to do here is we're going to write var recipe underscore material underscore dictionary, because we are going to want to be able to store all of our recipes materials in a dictionary of where the the key of the dictionary is going to be the actual item, and the value is going to be the amount of items that are inside of that array for that specific item. So yeah, basically item, amount of items. So we're going to call this a recipe material dictionary, and we're just going to leave it as an empty dictionary. So this is where the fun begins. I think the first thing I want to do is come to the crafting UI here, and we'll make sure to set the inventory slot up correctly so we can instantiate that. So let's go and sort out our export variables. Where is that stored? That will be stored under the UI, scenes UI, and it will be under inventory slot here. And the next thing is the recipe array. Well, we know we have 3 recipes, so let's go add 3 elements. Let's go under resources, under recipes here, and let's grab the health potion, the mana potion, and the stamina potion. So that's our exports ready to go. Now, moving on to the first thing I want to do is actually get the tree here populated with each recipe. I think that's a good start. That way we know what we're working with. To do that, I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to call this func build underscore recipe underscore tree. It's going to take no parameters and return void. Because we have access to the onReady var tree, I really don't like how the spacing on this is. There we go, that's better. What we first need to do inside of a tree is hide the root of the tree. So let's go and use tree.hide root. Now the reason why we do that is because you will end up with an empty box at the very top of your, like an empty cell basically, or an empty column header at the very top of your tree. We don't want that, so we're going to want to set the tree.hide root equal to true. So that's just automatically via code going to hide the root of the tree. Now you don't have to do this via code. You can just click tree here and you can go down to hide root and you can just click on and it will hide the root for you, so you don't even need this line of code. I'm going to do this because I like doing things through code. The next thing is we're going to want to create the root of, so basically the next root of all of our items. So we're going to call this var tree underscore root. I know this might sound a bit confusing, but bear with me. It's going to be of type tree item because that's all the tree can actually contain is tree items. And we're going to set this equal to tree dot create item. That's it. So this basically, leaving this field empty where it says parent here, this creates a new root for our items to attach to. So let's go and actually attach some items to it. And for this, we're going to need to mess with our recipe array. Specifically, we're going to want to loop through it. So let's go for recipe in recipe array. So we can now get each individual recipe from the recipe array. We're going to want to create a new recipe slot for each recipe. So to do that, we're going to go var new underscore recipe underscore slot. And this is going to be of type tree item. So it's going to be another tree item. We're going to set that equal to tree dot create item. But instead of leaving it blank, we want to actually attach this to the root of our tree. So we're going to attach this to tree root. Now that we have that, let's give our recipes two things. We're going to want to, one, see the icon of the recipe, so see what the actual recipe looks like just at first glance without having to click into it. And we're going to want to give it some an actual title so we know what it is. So let's grab the new recipe slot dot set underscore icon. We're going to want column 0 because it's the column we're going to be working with. It's always going to be column 0. And now we're going to want to grab basically the item texture from the recipe. Now, if you remember correctly, when we set up the recipe, I can actually go and show this off here, item recipes. There is no item texture in here, but there is an item texture inside of item data. So we can actually grab the recipe, grab the finalized item, and then grab the texture from that. So we don't have to do anything else. So to do that, we're going to grab the recipe dot recipe final item dot item texture. Now, if you sorted your classes out correctly, you will get autocomplete on all of these lines, which is really useful. So we now have the item texture sorted. The next thing to do is new underscore recipe slot dot set underscore text because we need to know what it is. So that to a 0 again because column 0. Then we can go recipe dot recipe final item dot item name. So now we can use Control S and save. So you remember we gave the recipe itself a name and we gave the final item the name. Now they are the same name. What I like to do is use the actual item name itself for the recipe. Kind of a little bit of a double thing here where you can use either. I like to use the item name because it helps with some of the sorting in the future. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. But that's it. This is how you build out a tree with a list of recipes. So in the ready function, let's just go and use build underscore tree. So let's call that there. So build recipe tree, hit Control S and save. And we'll hit play and see what happens. And as you can see, immediately we have 3 recipes here. Health potion, mana potion, stamina potion. Now this is the really cool part about the trees. 1, we have an icon for each of them. 2, these are clickable cells, and these fire a signal when we click on them. They act like buttons, but they're not buttons, which is just really, really nice. But this kind of makes creating a really long list of things really easy. So that is the recipe tree built. So now we're going to want to click on the tree and actually do something, right, when we click on those cells. So let's just go through a quick explanation and really think this through. What do we want? Well, we want to populate the name, the texture, and the amount of items we need in our recipe menu, right? That's kind of what we want to do. Now, as I said, these act as buttons, but they aren't buttons. But there is a signal for when you click on one of these cells, so on cell selected, which means we can use that signal to grab the actual recipe we want and start populating this stuff. So let's do that. Click on the tree, go to node, and we'll go down to cell selected. Now you'll see here that it has 0 parameters and doesn't return anything. So let's just connect to this because, well, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. We're going to need to grab the recipe name. So how do we grab the recipe name? Well, this is really simple. We create a variable and we'll call it cell underscore recipe underscore name, because remember we're clicking on a cell, which means we must have some way of getting the data from that cell, right? So let's set this equal to a string. We'll set this equal to, or set this as type string and set it equal to tree dot. So tree has to have something, right? It has to have something to get the cells selected. So let's just write tree dot cell, and you're getting a signal here. Is that what we want? Okay, no, maybe not. Let's go to, how about just write in selected and see what that pops up. Oh, there we go. Get selected column, get selected, set selected. That's really useful. Let's use get selected, and then just use dot get underscore text. Oh, and we want text from what? Well, our name is in column 0, so let's go 0. Now what I can do here is, just to make sure that this is functioning, is I can print out the cell recipe name. So let's go and make sure this is functioning. Remember, on cell selector is going to fire when we click on one of these. So in the output down here, health potion, mana potion, stamina potion. Perfect. So now we have our recipe name. We're going to need to do some comparisons to start checking what we're actually doing with this. So let's first go if the current recipe name. Oh, wait, no, sorry. So we need to do some comparisons, but to do this, we're going to need to kind of figure out what recipe we actually have based off of the current recipe name. This is the only downside to using a grid or using a tree, is I couldn't really figure out how to store or connect the recipe to it correctly or in a good enough way. So this is kind of how I'm going to do this. We're going to go for recipe in recipe array. We're basically just going to do what we've done previously, where we loop over the recipe name. And now to do that check, all we have to do here is we have to go write if the recipe dot recipe final item dot, since this is the item that we are actually using, the recipe name and the item name, we are using the same one, we can just go recipe final item dot item name is equal to the cell recipe name. So in this case, health potion, health potion. You can do the same thing with just the recipe name. I've been preferring to use the item name. Might be a bit confusing, kind of what I ended up sticking with. It just feels a little bit better. So if the recipe final item name is equal to the cell recipe name, so if the names match up and they're the same thing, we need to do something. So what we now need to do, right, I'm going to write pass here, is we need to actually build out the recipe window. So I'm going to go and split this off into a separate function, just for ease of readability. So I'm going to go func. I'm going to go build underscore recipe underscore material underscore window. So what is this going to need to take? Well, it's going to need to take the item recipe that we have actually just picked from the array, right? So to do that, we're just going to give it a parameter of selected underscore recipe of type item recipe. And it's going to need no return type, so we'll just give it a void return type, and we'll write pass. This means we can now, inside of this if statement here, call build item recipe, or build recipe material window, so we can actually start building out, and we can just pass through that recipe that we are currently looped on. And after that, I'm just going to do a quick return and return out of the if statement and return out of the for loop, so we don't loop over the for, or loop over the rest of the things anymore, because we don't need to. And now for the actual building of the recipe window. The first thing that we want to do here is we want to grab the name of our item. So what did we name that? We named that the title label. So let's grab the title label, set that dot text, and set that equal to the selected recipe dot recipe final item dot item name. We're going to want to set that texture as well, right? So let's go and set the item texture dot texture equal to the selected recipe dot recipe final item dot item texture. And now we're going to need to do some more interesting things. But first, let's just go and make sure that this loop is working. So what should happen here at a minimum is this should change to whatever we click, and this should also change. So health potion, mana potion, Stamina potion. So we're actually getting some modifications here made. That's perfect. That's exactly what we need. So this is where the dictionary stitching together begins. This was my nightmare for a little while. This genuinely took me a couple of days to figure out, and still kind of questioning it. But if anybody figures out a better way of doing this, or has a better way of using dictionaries for this, please let me know. Otherwise, arrays are also a better or a easier way to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to go for recipe underscore material, because this is where we're going to want to start stitching together our dictionary full of materials for the recipes. So we're going to need the material itself and the quantity of that material. So we're going to go for recipe material in the selected recipe dot recipe materials array. So now we're actually accessing the array inside the material, or inside the recipe. We now want to do some quick checks. Now we did the same, well, actually the exact same thing for the inventory when we set up that dictionary, stitch that together, but we're going to do the same thing for this. So we're going to go if recipe material underscore dictionary. There we go. So we're going to grab the dictionary and we're going to go dot has. So we want to first make sure if it has that material inside of it. So let's grab that and just paste through the key in this case, which is that recipe material. Now, if it does have that, we just want to basically increment the value of the key, or in this case, the material, by 1, right? So let's go do that. Let's go recipe, material dictionary, pass through the recipe underscore material as the key, and then just go plus equals 1. I'm going to separate this down to make it a bit more readable. After that, we just want to go else. So on this instance, if it doesn't actually have that recipe inside of it, we want to add it to the dictionary, right? So we're just going to grab the dictionary, we're going to push through that recipe underscore material, and we want to set that equal to 1. So this first one increments and the second one adds. So in this instance, here we are incrementing if it does have that. If it doesn't have that, add to the dictionary. What we should be able to do after this is honestly just print out the recipe material dictionary, and we should get the keys and values for each of those. So to make this a little bit more readable in the output, I'm going to make a quick modification that I don't suggest you do. We're going to, instead of just adding the recipe material, we're going to add the name of each recipe, like so. And then we're just going to hit Control S and save, and assignment is not allowed, and that is because I cut off a square bracket there. There we go. Now we're going to click run scene. Let's go and click, and as you can see here, so the health potion takes 1 stamina potion, 1 mana potion. The mana potion takes 1 of each, and the stamina potion takes 1 of each. Okay, that's interesting. There is something here going wrong, right? So what is this doing that's actually causing a problem? Quite simple. I need to also change the .item name. So basically this is just because I forgot to change the .item name here for that final, for the actual if check itself. Let's go try that again. Health potion takes 1 stamina potion, 2 mana potions. Mana potion, 3 stamina potions, 2 mana potions, and 3 health potions. And the stamina potion is 3, 3, 3. So something is going a bit awkward here, right? You can see here that the more I click through, the more these items cost. So it's actually just rebuilding this every single time. That is a small issue. So let's go and fix that before we start doing anything else. We're just going to create a little cleaner function. So we're going to go func clean underscore material underscore window. I'm going to add to this as we go. And we're going to want to grab that material dictionary and use .clear. And then, just to kind of make my life a little bit easier in the future, we're going to preset this up to clear any children from the grid container that is going to be containing all of our item slots. So let's go for child in grid underscore container, which I have there, .get children. Now we're just going to grab each child and call the queue_free function on those children. Hit Control S and save. And now every time we build the recipe material window, so basically every single time the cell is selected, we are just going to clean the material window. Hit Control S and save, because that will clean out the dictionary and queue free all the children. So now what we should see is the correct amount of materials for each recipe, and these slots here should just disappear, which they did. 1, 2, 3, 2, and just 1. There you go. That's it. That's the correct amount of recipe and materials for each recipe. Now let's finish this off by doing the final for loop. You'll notice that I'm getting a bit for loop happy here, but this is the final one, I promise. We'll go for material underscore key in that new recipe material dictionary that we just created. Now, why am I calling this the material key? Well, each material inside of our dictionary is the key which contains the value, right? I've probably said this a few times now, but I really want to get this across. Dictionaries can be kind of confusing. So in this instance, we are grabbing the keys for each material. Now we want to do something, but we want to go based off of each material. We want to go var new underscore material, and we want to create an inventory slot based off of that. So equals inventory slot dot instantiate. Now I'm going to use the as keyword here and typecast it as an inventory component so it immediately knows what it needs to do. Oh wait, that's wrong. That is not an inventory component, that is an inventory slot. There we go. That was a very confusing error for a second there. That broke my brain. So now that we've got the inventory slot, what do we want to do? Well, we want to just grab the grid container that we have here, which contains all of our inventory slots, or is going to, and we're going to write dot add underscore child. We want to pass through that new material. And now, because of how I set up the inventory slot in the previous video, we have a little setter function that we can use. We can go new underscore material dot set item data. Now all we need to do is pass through the material key and the recipe material dictionary using that material key. And that will grab the key and the value pair for both. Now, this should break. This genuinely should break immediately. There it goes. Why is that breaking? Well, let's go and hit the set item data function and check our inventory slot, which I set up in the previous video. Set item data takes a new item of type item data and then the stack size of type integer to display the stack and the new item. Oh, that's interesting. Well, why is this not working? Well, if we remember correctly, I changed these to the item names. So let's go and remove those back down to what it should be. This is why I said you shouldn't make it the item name. Let's hit refresh and click, click, click. As you can see, we now have everything updating. We've got the health potion, its texture, and its requirements here. Perfect. That is actually all I'm going to be able to do today. In the next video, we'll get this all hooked up to the UI, like the actual UI container, and we'll get the control set up for it. We'll also be making it so it can take in the player's inventory and allow us to actually start crafting some items. So make sure to subscribe and hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss that video. Leave a comment if you have any questions, or even better, please come join the Discord, get faster responses, help me fix my own bad code, and if you need help fixing code, we're here for you. But yeah, make sure to have a good day and a great game dev journey, and I will see you in the next video.